To build native Facebook content to drive business results, that's a big question, right? Because that's essentially what we're all trying to figure out. I think there are a few pieces that go into it. I think the biggest piece for us, at least, is understanding how people's attention is shifting. So I think oftentimes we talk about content without actually talking about the context around that content, meaning how people are spending their time on Facebook, the fact that they're on mobile, the fact that people are drawn to consuming video, the way that they consume video, what's around the content that we're trying to present to people. So I think that's a big piece of it, is actually understanding the context and just kind of how people's attention plays out on these platforms. To maybe bring it down a level and give a little bit more tactical advice, mobile video, I think, is everything. So we as VaynerMedia are trying to be the best agency for video content on the mobile device. Going into 2017 and 2018, we're obsessed with that. So thinking about that, I think, will help drive business results. And then another thing that I spoke about earlier is building a system, whether that's a team or a process, to be able to test and optimize after you put content live is super, super important. So I think if historically many marketers think about creating one piece of content and just pushing it out there and seeing what happens, we think that there's opportunity now not just to tweak your content based on the data that you see coming back to you, but then also try to come up with different pieces of content segmented to your audiences on Facebook and make it more relevant that way. It's an interesting point because I think that sometimes we treat Facebook differently or treat social media differently, even digital differently. I don't think that's right. Like, there's always these conversations about this new app or that new platform and whether or not people should be there. What happens if it goes away in 2 years, or is Snapchat actually going to go mainstream? And the fact of the matter is, like, when people's attention is there, you should be marketing there in the same way that you would with a hit TV show. People aren't sitting around debating whether or not a hit TV show is going to be here in 2 seasons. They buy advertising there because people's attention is there. So I think that, advertising is advertising. And so I don't think that we should necessarily treat Facebook differently. And I think that, I think some of the best content, if you want to use the terminology of push versus pull, some of the best advertising is pull content no matter where it lives. In the UK, now's the time for the big Christmas TV spots, right, from John Lewis and all that. And they don't even have to put media dollars behind that anymore because people are drawn to it. They want to consume it because it's great content and has a tradition to it and all that. So I'm not sure that the conversation should really be all that different about Facebook, but yes, I would agree. It should not just be about trying to push content in front of people. I think good advertising, not just native advertising, is content that gives value, whether that's information or entertainment or just quality. So regardless of where it goes, I think that's important. So I think publishers I think anybody has a right to be skeptical about what the content around their advertising and what surfaces, whether that's on Facebook or any other channel. I think if you're paying for placement on some of these channels, there's some responsibility from the channel or the publisher, same way that there would be if you bought advertising on a website, for not to, for it to be in line with how you want your brand to be represented. I think it's just a question, like, the marketplace will decide, So I think right now the marketplace is saying that most advertisers feel pretty comfortable about the level of safeguards that Facebook has in place for that, and they're voting with their dollars, if you will. So it seems like most people are not too concerned about that. That can change. There's a lot of conversation right now about fake news and everything that happened in the US around the election. So it's constantly changing, and it's down to each marketer to understand. It depends on their brand too. Some brands have a bigger appetite for that type of risk or exposure, and some don't. So it completely depends on the brand and the marketer. I don't think that publishers misunderstand the use of Facebook. Actually, to be honest, I'm not sure. I think it depends on the publisher. I think if we were having this conversation 4 years ago, yes, but that's going away because Facebook as a marketing channel is becoming more mainstream, more people are using it, best practices are being developed, although it's still super early. So I think a lot of people do. I think the bigger thing that might be contributing to some type of misunderstanding is just how quickly the platform is changing and what best practices are on the platform. So it's not, you take TV, for example, and the advertising ecosystem and environment, both economic and creative, and TV, and that's 50 years, 60 years in the making, so it's a lot more established and rigid. And Facebook as a medium is changing so much quicker. How we use Facebook today is very different than how we used it 2 years ago. Things like Messenger and Live and Marketplace and everything that they're doing to iterate the product. So yeah, I think that speed of change really contributes to it. But from where we sit and the types of marketers that we speak to, we don't think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of it. It's just a question of how you can use it, and we think a lot of people aren't really taking advantage of the full potential. Best practices for advertising on Facebook. Mobile video right now, so creating video that is going to play well in a mobile environment. That's the biggest advice that I think I can give anybody. Really understanding the potential of Power Editor as just an ad tech platform, and not just doing the superficial kind of broad-based media buying on it, but actually using the wealth of data that Facebook has on your target audience to be able to segment by audience, by location, by gender, and drill very, very deep down, and then creating content that's relevant to those audiences. I think that's a big potential, and that speaks to something that's super important to us, which is the integration of creative and media. So thinking about creative based on a media plan, and thinking about a media plan based on what you want to do for creative, and then making sure that, what I mentioned earlier, that testing and optimization loop is really in place so that what you see in your media reporting informs what you're doing with your content, and vice versa. And then something else I spoke about today that I think is super important that oftentimes we ignore is just being a practitioner of it, So spending time on the platform, being intellectually curious about how people are using it, why they're using Facebook Live, why they're not using Facebook Live. So all those things I think contributed to being successful as a marketer on the platform. So the first one was designed for thumb-stopping power. So we throw around the term thumb-stopping content a lot internally, and really it just means that if you think about anybody using Facebook, they're on their phone, right? It's a mobile platform. I think that we can put that conversation to bed. So they're on their phone and literally scrolling through it like this, right? And there's, the stat that I put up earlier, there's 1,500 pieces of content that any user could potentially see when they log into Facebook. So there's a ton on there. And so they're scrolling through really, really fast. How do you make your content stand out enough that people are gonna stop their thumb and watch your video or click on your link or whatever action you actually want them to take? So designed for thumb-stopping power, that's a big one. Mobile video was the second one. So kind of beating a dead horse here, but that's the game right now on Facebook, especially, and we think everything else is gonna follow. And then the last one was building a system for testing and optimizing. So really making sure that even for your creative, which historically has been a very subjective discipline, you are taking a subjective approach to it, meaning you're using math and the data that the platform provides you to inform what you're doing creatively. Well, how we do the testing, we're a big agency now, so we do it a little bit differently. We have data scientists and media analysts and people who spend their whole day looking at the data and trying to draw out conclusions from it. But how I would advise, other businesses that maybe, don't have a team of 100 people working on it, to think about testing and optimizing is, first of all, it's just a management thing. I think somebody has to be accountable for it. So you, as whatever your role is, need to decide that it's something that is important to your organization. I think that it should be, but you have to make that own decision. Actually accept that enough to then give it to somebody to be responsible for. So whether that's you or somebody else, somebody needs to be responsible for implementing it. You need the right person to do it. Like, talent is everything. So you can have a strategy, you can have priorities and pillars, and I can tell you what I think is important, but if you don't have the right person to be able to do it, it's not gonna matter in the end. And then, more tactically, we check in on our spends 3 times a day. So getting to that level of detail, I think, is important. How you set up your reporting is important. And then sometimes it's as simple as we have our media analysts sit next to our copywriters and art directors. So they're, not just talking day to day, but they build a working relationship together. So a lot of it is really just how you set up your people and your team.